welcome to Lawwiser. Today we kickstart our program Women in Law Dialogues with our very first session where you'll get to know more about the interesting stories and journeys of our fantastic panelists. We're also going to have very important conversations around the inclusion development and the retention of women as legal professionals. I'm super excited to have our panelists with us today. And I'm going to give you a quick round of introductions to them, and then of course we'll get to know much more about how they've reached where they are, and there's going to be a lot more in store in the discussion today. So starting with Ms. Geeta Luthra. Geeta is a designated senior advocate in the Supreme Court of India and has been practicing law for nearly 4 decades. She serves as the Vice President of the Indian Council of Arbitration. Geeta is also known to have supported many cases and causes through her pro bono work. Our second panelist today is Ms. Manjari Chaudhary. Manjari is the Executive Director and General Counsel at Maruti Suzuki India. She is a seasoned General Counsel with over 2 decades of experience as a lawyer. Prior to Maruti, she has held significant in-house counsel roles at various divisions of GE. Interestingly, Manjari did not start out intending to be a legal professional, and we will talk a bit more about that very soon. Our third panelist for today is Ms. Padmaja Kaul. Padmaja is a partner in the dispute resolution practice at Indus Law. She is based out of the Delhi office. She is adept at handling the entire spectrum of commercial disputes. A significant part of her practice involves advising and representing clients on issues such as shareholder disputes, insolvency, winding up, white-collar crimes, and employment disputes. Our fourth panelist today is Ms. Namita Viswanath. Namita is a partner at Indus Law and she's joining us from Bangalore today. Namita is well regarded for her technology law expertise across all industry sectors. Moreover, she is at the forefront of data privacy issues in India. So a very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for taking out the time to be with us here today. I'm going to start with my first question, which is for Manjari. Manjari, you were 7 to 8 years into a stable teaching career before you went to study law in London. Can you share with us what was running on in your mind when you made that decision to completely change your career track? And in connection with that, what advice would you give to women who may decide to make a mid-career shift and maybe a bit later on in their lives? They may not have started out thinking of one career as an option, whether it be law or something else, and then kind of life has other plans. So we would love to hear more about that.
Thank you, Lavanya. So to your point, there was never a very considered decision. I did law with no intentions of being a lawyer, quite honestly. And it was more about did my LLB to please some senior counsels in Punjab, Haryana High Court who thought I should do my law. So while I used to teach in the morning in the same university, I would go in the evening and read law. And then there were some extenuating personal circumstances that my younger brother thought that it was best that I take a sabbatical and I go. And it was a great thing to do the LLM. And then thanks to Geeta here and the whole committee of Felix who gave me that scholarship to go and read LLM at London. And I thoroughly enjoyed that period of my life because it was all about just studying and having fun and just study. It was only when I finished doing that I realized that I liked doing law a hell of a lot. And I had seen corporate law at close hand even in London, and I saw that it was coming up to age even in India. It had kind of, the whole liberalization had started in the early 90s, and law firms were really flourishing at that point in time, or starting to flourish, let's say. And I decided that let me take the plunge. And that's how it happened. It was a very conscious decision after coming back from England that I take to law. And then lo and behold, you realize that when you walk in 7 years later into a profession or behind your peers 7 years, there's a lot of catching up to do. And there was always I suddenly realized that, it's going to be very difficult. But now that I had made my mind up, there was no looking back. And I was quite determined. I was told many a times that, "Arey, you last 6 months," and stuff like that. So all of those things were one had to go through. But it was with I really don't think, for a minute, of course, you do feel that when you walk in. I moved from one career to the other, but there are some people who just have other circumstances which do not allow them to get into something, and they have passed their degrees and then they take some time off and then they get into it. The road is difficult. It is not quite unlike the West, where pretty much you pick up where you left. Even there is some sort of you have to take a little step back a little, and come at a little lower level, and then work your way up. But in this case, I didn't have to take a step back. It was just that I was 7 years behind, and there was a lot of catching up to do. And so you realize that only when you walk into a law firm and you realize that people are nearly at partner level, and you are trying to struggle as a young associate with people of the age who I was teaching at that point in time. So it was quite interesting and quite a leveler, I must say. But I think there are 2-3 things that I think worked in my favor, or I think worked for me over the passage of time. One was, sheer determination. I think there's no substitute for that. With that is lots of hard work. Doing law, or for that matter, any profession, it's not easy. These days you have law universities, you have campus placements and things like that. It's a little bit more structured. When I got into it, and Geeta will vouch for it, I mean, I didn't come from a lawyer's family. Everybody's in the civil service. And here I am, trying to find my feet. It was not terribly easy. You had to start from the bottom and take your way up. But a lot of determination, a lot of hard work, and a lot of family support. I think I had it in ample measure. My parents, my younger brother, who's a civil servant himself, always pushing me on. And my question always was to them, I'm so much behind. When am I going to get to where they are, So the answer I would always get is that, initially it takes time to get to a certain optimal level. Once you are there, then it's up to you to, whether you want to plod along or whether you want to move ahead with some supersonic speed. But the fact is that there is a certain time that's required to reach a certain level. So to really, for any viewers who are listening to this, I think determination, hard work, and not giving up, and a hugely, hugely supportive sense, family and friends. That's worked for me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing that. Moving on to Geeta. Actually, kind of connected to Manjari's question, Geeta, you started practicing, like I said, almost 4 decades ago, and obviously things were very, very different then, generally in the practice, and I'm sure especially in litigation. So it'll be really interesting if, based on your experience and observations, if you can share with us over these years, what are the positive changes that you have observed, in the inclusion and the growth of women as lawyers?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we joined the profession, there were hardly any women. I, of course, was a determined young soul. So at the age of 7, I decided that I had to do law. And my father was who was a senior advocate and a very well-respected senior counsel, Mr. Luthra, didn't want his daughter to do law simply because he found that there was no space for women lawyers in our profession. So, and I, along the lines, I was doing very well. So in school, college, law college, I was sort of almost topping the grade or coming among the first 1 or 2. But my father was not very happy because he felt his daughter could excel at anything. So why did she want to get into this profession of women lawyers, of which was non-existent? And the 1 or 2 women lawyers that were there were not making a great mark. But fortunately, my mother was with me. So she would always say, I want one of my daughters to be a doctor, one to be a lawyer. My brother's also a lawyer, incidentally. But his profession was not the question because, obviously, the question is women getting into law. And that was a big issue. And then my father told me that if you are getting into the profession, and he was very proud because I went to Cambridge, and but he would still thought, he said, when you are so good, why don't you do the IAS or the Foreign Service? And I said, but you gave it up. He said, that may be, but that's, for him, the parameters were different because success parameters were different for women. And therefore, for a woman, the administrative service would have been a nice, comfortable, respectable job, not with the struggle that we've gone through. So when I came back from Cambridge, I was determined, and I've said this earlier also, in fact, I was, in the middle, when I came back for 1 year, I did 2 degrees there, the MPhil and the LLM. When I came back, my mother took me to Rishikesh and to the Swami Sivanand ashram. And there it was written X percentage of your income. I think it was 30, or I can't remember it actually now, 10 or 30. And I said, but there is no income. What do I give? There is no income. The income is 300 rupees. So there is no income. What do I give to charity? So then I decided I have to give my time to charity. So then with Manushi, I started Women Legal Aid, and I started
Alert from updates available.
I started going to Tihar and doing work there for women prisoners, for juveniles, and so on, which was on behalf of the legal aid. But I really enjoyed it. And therefore, a lot of my work remains pro bono work. I love looking after people. And I think one of my main mottos in life has been that law may be a profession, but first and foremost, you are a service. The same way doctors are supposed to be serving society, we as lawyers are supposed to serve society. And therefore, some portion of our times, in whichever way we can, we have to give back to society. That's what I've felt about it. Now, how inclusive is it? So law was not inclusive. So if a woman insists on her point, she's aggressive.
Yes.
If a man insists on his point, he's assertive. And lawyers are supposed to be assertive. But you're not supposed to be aggressive, and women are aggressive. So we had all these things. I remember when I was thinking of applying for seniorship, and I applied for it much later than many of my colleagues. And I dare say that I wasn't much worse than many of them. I simply applied later because a lot of the judges had this great perception that Geeta is too assertive. Now, whatever the too assertive means, but the fact is you are assertive. So if you keep giving in and if you take a back seat, but that's when you were obviously less established. Over the years, women have come into the profession. And I remember going to France when I was studying in Cambridge. And I went there and I saw some 50% of the lawyers being women, maybe after 4 or 5 years of my beginning practice. It wasn't exactly when I started. And it was such a happy experience because you saw, 50% lawyers here. We were looking for each other. I remember one of my colleagues or classmates who started law, and she said, well, in her high court, there wasn't a woman's toilet. So she said, I would go back at 2 for the only reason that there was no toilet. So I had to go back home at 2. So obviously people have slowly worked their way, and I hate to think of it as glass ceilings. And I would not say that if there is a glass ceiling, it's been totally broken. I also feel that women have to work twice as hard to do half as well. You have to put everything behind. And I would agree with Manjari that you need a supportive family. Because if you're going to be doing something 24/7, you have to have family that is supportive of you. So there is no way that you can do as well if the family is not supportive in whichever way. In your idiosyncrasies, when other people would be expecting that they will be chatting with each other, I would open a book of partition and I say, I want to crack this and I want to understand this. Why? Do you have a case tomorrow? No, I don't have a case. It's just that I want to know this law. So there are mad things which we do, and there's a passion with which we do them. And of course, there is no substitute for hard work. And I think I'm very happy to see a lot of our younger members of the bar are doing brilliantly well. And it's a great pleasure to see how they are doing. I still remain assertive/aggressive. I try not to be, but I still remain what I am. We've had only 8 women Supreme Court judges. And sadly, I do remember one comment which was made when Justice Fatima Bibi was made the judge of the Supreme Court. Someone commented that we are taking care of representation, which being woman, minority, and she never headed a bench. That changed. And all our women judges have done us proud in the Supreme Court, but ultimately it's a very abysmal minority. We also have to recognize the fact that there weren't that many women to choose from, but those that were there to choose from, it was not that you were accepted and acknowledged so easily. Now, how have things changed? I think matters have changed drastically. And I don't think as a woman, the fact that we are doing well and proving ourselves is good enough. I feel we can't be wearing our being a woman on our sleeve. I think that's very important because that's how you make your mark. And therefore, this aspect of my professional, except in when you are trying to encourage other women, is an aspect which I don't like to overplay, because I think if you're good, you're competent, and you are twice as good, then you will do at least half as well, if not better. I hope I haven't spoken too long.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Padmaja. And, it is, so Padmaja, you're more of a new age lawyer, coming from the time that Geeta was talking about. And I wanted to kind of, delve into another aspect of litigation, on the corporate law side. So we all know that litigation has always been considered to be a tough role for women. And you have excelled in the field and you become a partner quite early on. Can you give us an insight into your journey so far? And also, I wanted to ask you that, have you at certain times felt a certain or a greater gender disparity when compared to your peers in the corporate law practice vis-a-vis litigation?
Thank you, Lavanya. Yes, I can honestly say that the journey for me also has not been that easy. But I'm proud and happy of where I've reached. And yes, at a slightly younger age than others. Whenever someone sort of mentions something like this, I always remind myself of Robert Frost's words. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. So when it comes to a woman's journey in law, I feel the legal field is, like everyone said, is a very male-dominated one. the society still remains steeped in patriarchy. Female lawyers are seen as women first, then wives and daughters, and then probably lawyers. So this relegates women to maybe a household commodity at times. So it is important for us women to take charge and give our 100% or maybe more. My mantra has always been believe in yourself, be strong, assertive, determined, and exude confidence. Success will follow. I'm also a first generation lawyer who wants to make a mark as a litigator. So naturally, I had a lot of support from my family. And law is often referred to an elitist men's club. So for a woman, therefore, it's very daunting, when you're jumping into this profession. But I had to fight really hard. When I entered the profession a decade ago, there were very few female partners in law firms, and that too in litigation. Thus, I not only had to ape the style of men, but I also had to put in those extra hours to compensate for the perceived disadvantage of my gender. Over time, I learned to navigate the obstacles, by teaching myself new skills, speaking twice to make myself heard and gain respect, speaking loud, clear, and with authority. Smile at the face of perhaps well-intended jokes steeped in patriarchy. And most importantly, learn where to draw the boundary. So let me put it this way, actually, my ambition and determination had the potential of me being considered as aggressive or one with attitude. However, and which will not have made me favorite amongst my colleagues for sure. So, but I was like, how do I play the game then? On one hand, society has handed me stereotypes that were aimed at sort of preventing me from excelling. And on the other, my attempts to break these stereotypes were potentially unwelcome. So it was tough. But what I did was I kept moving upward and onward. And I let my work speak for itself, and I let that do the talking. Fast forward less than a decade, I was offered partnership in Indus Law. I often look back at the moment with extreme gratitude, actually, because if I would have got bogged down by the disadvantages faced by me as a female lawyer, I would have never grown. Now coming to the point, has the bias stopped that I've made partner? Sadly, no, it's not, unfortunately. I've been told by a bench very recently that they prefer my male colleague's voice over my female one. In fact, I've had a client question whether I am capable of handling a criminal matter because of my gender. So there are many more instances like these which I face on a day-to-day level. What do I do about them? I mean, I've grown a thick skin and I've learned to smile at these adversities and push through. And then what has that resulted in? I got a favorable order from the bench, and the same client now has me on speed dial, and mostly for his criminal matters. So now, so coming to your question or the preconceived notion that corporate law is more suited for women. I have worked in law firms all my life, throughout my professional career. I interact and share the same office space as my female corporate counterparts. I see them working as hard as I do and face the same male bias that I have faced. So the question I ask is, why this notion? I guess probably the answer would be rooted in perceptions of the society and nothing else. That if a woman enters a corporate world, she will be able to have a better work-life balance, have easier hours, maybe sophisticated clients or a better pay. According to me, I think the only difference lies in that the litigators practice their craft in court, while as the corporate lawyers practice their craft in boardrooms. So I don't see much of a distinction between the two in terms of the hard work and the nights that they put in, and sheer determination and ambition in both sides of women. So and I want to share a quote by the great RBG. She once said that so often in life, things that you regard as an impediment turn out to be great good fortune. So I think that is the secret to a woman's success. We should not let these obstacles sort of bog us down. And eventually they, because I feel they eventually will turn into an opportunity, and the next thing you know, you're probably a partner in a law firm.
The next question is for you. You have vast experience advising companies in the space of fintech and data protection, amongst many other things that you do. These sectors are fairly new and dynamic. I want to know from you what has helped you carve a niche in this space, and what advice would you give to young professionals wanting to emulate a career path like yours, whether they be young women lawyers or male lawyers, but young aspirants who, because it's a very dynamic, sector and space that you work in. So, it would be great to hear, how you made it up till here.
Thanks, Lavanya. So if I just were to, take a step back and, look at my journey from the time I graduated. So when I graduated, firstly, I had absolutely no intention of getting into a law firm. Much less of working so ambitiously and so passionately, for so many years. I think I was quite clueless when I graduated. I think the one consistent pattern in my life has been, constant transition at different points in time. And what I have learned over the years is that you need to have in those defining moments, you need to step up and show the courage. Whether it is to, embrace the change that is coming your way, adapting to the new challenges, and then outperforming. So, when I graduated, at the time, I was initially in-house for quite a few years. And then I took a break. I took a sabbatical for 2 years when I had my son. And then I went back to school. I got my LLM, and then I came to a law firm. So it's been a journey, with several transitions at different points in time. But I think at every point I had to, of course, have the courage, put in the hard work, but I think more importantly also have the right attitude of, that the whole win or learn attitude, that you give it your best. If things go your way, it's great. If not, it's a great learning opportunity. So I think the right attitude has helped me a lot. Of course, like everyone on this panel mentioned, I think we don't do this often enough, but I think we need to recognize the allies in our life, whether it's our families, our friends, our supportive bosses, colleagues, and for that matter, even our team. Because I don't think enough credit goes to encouraging bosses and a great team who help you so much in the long run. We are as good as a team we build at the end of the day. So I think we need to take that moment to probably identify these allies and acknowledge them, and also be thankful for the support system that we have. And if I were to give any inputs or advice to anyone listening to this, it would be firstly have the courage to follow your heart, of course. Secondly, build the right team. Never be afraid to hire someone brighter than you. Never be never think twice before hiring someone different from you. And I would say, while you may have ambition, and purposeful ambition is great, I think empathy is something that we should not lose sight of. And I think at several points, specifically as women, you tend to hear discouraging statements like, either you're not capable of this, or this is beyond your reach, and things like that. So I would say we shouldn't really let others' perceptions, set any limits for us. And while it's important to take criticism seriously, let's not take it too personally. Yeah.
Right, thank you. I actually, Namita, I want to ask you something. It's not part of the questions I shared with you, but just, while we're at it, it was interesting for me to note that, you were first in in-house counsel roles, and then you moved to a law firm. Up till now, whatever I have seen up till now, it's usually the other way around. So just want to know from you, like, how did that switch happen? What made you decide, to move to a law firm? And how has that been, how has that experience been different for you?
So, like I said, it wasn't a conscious, plan that I chalked out for myself to move from in-house to law firm.
Yeah.
If I had done that, I would find the whole thought very daunting, to be honest. I think I was in-house for a while. At that time, I didn't have any plans to move to a law firm. But when I took the break and went back to school to do my LLM, I think for for reasons I cannot explain, I suddenly, found myself very gutsy, where I thought if I have anyway taken a break to do LLM, I might as well, pursue the one lingering ambition I had to, get into a law firm and prove myself. Of course, at that point, I had no idea whether I would, let alone carve a niche for myself. I didn't even know whether I would, stick around long enough to prove myself. But I have noticed, as with all other challenges in my life, that I think if you're consistent and you see this as a, marathon rather than a sprint, I think, before you know it, you've gone way beyond the, goalposts you set for yourself. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm going to ask you one question which is open to the floor before I come back to the one-on-one questions. So this is in no particular order, so please feel free to, pitch in and say whatever you guys want to. So the question is that in the past year, we have seen many global women leaders being celebrated for how they have dealt with the pandemic. How do you think that leadership styles of women differ from that of men? And what value do you think that women leaders add to the table?
Okay, a couple of things. I think there are, when you are professionals, I think there are certain similarities across the board, irrespective of gender. But certain things that very specifically, I think I've seen women bring more on the table is that one, you can be, there's a lot more empathy, that they bring in. There is also a greater sense of collaboration. I think women tend to collaborate a little more. They're also good at consensus building. Yes, that's very important because their decisions are, and those decisions I feel which are built out of consensus are more sustainable and perhaps have a greater buy-in over a longer period of time. And those can add more value to whatever you are working on or whatever may be the issue at hand. And the other is women also tend to bring a greater sense of, I would say, they are more ethical. They believe more in integrity. They like, if they are good professionals, then they are very good professionals with keeping that in mind. I think they like to be very fair most often. And I'm generalizing here, so there will always be outliers on both sides of the spectrum. But as an average, I feel that these are a few things that they will bring in. They are more open to a different perspective, a different point of view. They will absorb it, they will think through it, they will introspect. And, it's not always that it's my way or the highway, so it's always about bringing in and understanding that there could be other points of view which could bring, could equally add to value to the table. And to your question that how in the pandemic, this, I think I've seen it work out a little more in the pandemic because I know that we were all working out of home. I have a team of nearly 40 people. So, working from home had brought its own challenges, irrespective of the work. The work-life balance, the whole fact of being cooped in, the whole anxiety around the pandemic. You have, there is no break-off time between office work and homework, housework. And oftentimes work from home became doing work for home also. So there was a lot of angst. I could see a sense of anxiety, frustration, a feeling of being cooped in, what's going on, when's going to happen. I thought, I didn't see that many of my colleagues do that, but I think what I used to do was that I used to keep every 10 days or so, I would have a meeting of the entire team. It had no specific purpose, but just to get everyone virtually connected and just share your thoughts. Anything that comes to your mind, you can speak about. Some people, we had women give birth in my team during this pandemic. We had people who lost their loved ones in this during this pandemic. There were people like me who suffered from pandemic, and a couple of others who got COVID. So it was quite a mixed bag, and it was quite an open house. So I think that I felt really helped as a safety valve. So it sort of allowed the stress, tension to dissipate, and you realize that everyone else is in the same boat. They are coping. I can cope too. And there's some people, who give suggestions. You can use that.
So my thought on this is that I don't know whether women are as exceptional as Manjari puts it. I'm very happy to hear her speak so well about our gender. It's very heartening. But what I thought I noticed about the women leaders, whether it was Merkel, New Zealand, Australia, etc., what I thought was that there was a lot of humility in them, and there was a lot more vision. So perhaps it's to do with what Manjari says, you can multitask. And if you're multitasking, you also are able to see a lot more on your plate than a unidimensional aspect. And because of that, perhaps, I think the humility as well as the sense of vision is what made these women leaders, to my mind, stand out.
I wanted to add there, yes, one of the women I also looked up to throughout the pandemic was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. I mean, she led the charge and made sure that our country not only suffered actually minimally, but also recovered speedily. I mean, so everyone just was asking, how is she doing this? What is she doing different from the others? What's her style of working? And I think that is where it comes to the fact that she is a woman, and, she led it very differently. And, because it's beyond politics or geography or economics, she just played her strengths as a woman there. So, because men in their style usually are, autocratic, whereas women are more democratic in their approach, just how it was put, because when life throws a curveball, men usually regress into an, authoritative mode, whereas women show cooperation, they show participative attitudes, which is what's required to lead situations and organizations. And I feel that, women naturally excel in that. I mean, that just comes naturally to women. And, like everyone put it here, we are better at multitasking, working from home, which is what the pandemic actually taught us, balancing tough situations between work and life. So I think it's these softer skills which have contributed, towards women finding a greater sort of balance and success in life. I personally, have developed certain, unique leadership styles for, working with my team at Indus Law. The team and I work as a family. We work in sync with each other. I lead my team in a manner where I encourage them to develop their independent style while maintaining their synergy within the team.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Padmaja, I'm going to come back to you with my next question. So over the years, we've observed that, while the number of women enrolling into law colleges has increased significantly, which is great, that's very encouraging. But somehow that representation does not seem to be reflecting, in leadership positions at the partner level, etc. Why do you think that is? And based on your experience, what measures do you feel like real measures, that can be taken at the ground level to bring about a change in this situation?
So, well, yes, a couple of decades ago, if someone would have asked, why there are such few women in leadership positions in law, I think that would have been the answer. There aren't enough women lawyers and law students. I think we've redressed that situation, and more women are studying law now and joining the profession. But I feel we've not been able to redress the need for a congenial environment for them to rise up the ladder. People still believe a woman cannot be a successful lawyer along with managing a family. Sadly, men are still circumspect while promoting a woman to leadership positions. We are often judged on our marital status, about our children. Men have just developed these theories that in order to excel in a leadership role, a person must be aggressive, competitive, task oriented. Another probably cliche that exists is that ambition in men is considered as a sign of strength, whereas in women it is not so the case. Women who enact strong and confident leadership styles are seen as competent, but definitely not likable. And conversely, women using a softer managerial style rather are liked but not considered competent. So you see, there's a double-edged sword situation there. There are certain other qualities of women, such as interpersonal relations, empathy, higher EQ, which are not considered as leadership qualities by this male-dominated society. So hence, it all comes back to what I said earlier. I think us women have to push harder to prove ourselves. Moreover, I think we still have a lot of men holding positions of power who are surrounded by informal male caucuses, while women stand excluded from these caucuses. So this will only change when women reach the top. There can't be another solution. Speaking purely from a law firm litigation perspective, the visual impact actually of a woman leader can have an immense sort of impact on the younger women and even men. So I work with many corporates where general counsels are women. At the courts, we have a number of female senior counsels who stand tall in their chosen field. In fact, some such eminent women are part of the discussion today here with me. This is very inspiring. And the younger generation of women have a lot to learn from them. In fact, I think they're a prime example of how the resilient nature of women has resulted in us naturally, being willing and able to put in the hard work and thereby, sort of increasing our output and efficiency. Coming to myself, I am so fortunate to be a part of a firm where a significant proportion of the partners are women. And I think this is what we need: more assertive, confident, determined, and ambitious women. They will inspire more younger women to follow this path. Each woman, I feel, who stands tall and follows her passion will contribute to a breakdown of the bias and automatically lead to more women in leadership roles.
Thank you. Okay, so very closely connected, since we're on this topic, and your daughter is a bright young lawyer herself. And I really want to know, very, very curious, and I'm sure our audience would also like to know, could you share with us some of the advice that you have given her when she's faced difficult, situations? And I'm sure she has. We're all talking about that. What advice have you given her from your wealth of experience as a lawyer, and then also from the perspective of a mother? Because sometimes you can look at a situation from those two different roles in a different way. So if you could just share a bit, with us on those interactions.
So this is a horrible question to put to me because I for one, I think I've been this horribly non-participative mother. But since you've asked me, I was scratching my head and I asked my daughter, I said, Shivani, have I ever advised you? Please tell me. I have to answer this. So she was saying, yes. So I said, I think I told you don't go near law. It's too demanding a profession. She said, and that I told you, be like your father, be a scientist. What a cool life he has. So she was laughing. She says, no, I don't recall that. I said, well, maybe I just wished it in my heart of hearts, and I never really told you this. But having said that, she said, I remember at one time you were besotted that I should become a pilot because you had such a love of traveling that this is what you kept telling me. But coming to a more serious answer, the fact is that law is all consuming. It's a jealous mistress. I used to play some amount of sports, play hockey, play other sports, do several extracurricular. But now all the time we are burning the midnight oil. So the question is, you do lose a lot of priorities. If you have a child, then you think that while other people may be partying or networking, If you've spent 20 hours in the office, you want to spend 4 hours at home with your child. I mean, you don't want to be going out for dinner. So there is a weighing, whether it's your child or your mother or your parent. And a lot of women feel that's, I'm sure a lot of men feel it's very important. But for me, going to my mother every day was very important. So all these aspects, you are balancing in a professional life all the time. We all are making our balances, and we are the best to determine what the balance should be. But I think we have to not lose perspective. So to her, whether my advice or not, as a lawyer, she has managed to go to Penn and do her New York bar, etc., come back because of because I'm sure the parents would have had long faces if she hadn't come back. So she had no choice for that reason. But she's so far managed a balance. So she is doing whatever activities, her boxing and her extracurricular and her gym and so on. How long you can keep it up, how much you can keep it up, because as time goes on, your balance and your risk, what you need to balance increases. So my advice to her has always been, unlike most parents who tell their children, you must do 10 internships, you must do 20 internships. I used to tell her, although she did 10 internships because she never followed my advice, but I used to tell her, don't do more than 4, 5. You'll be working all your life as a lawyer. You'll be working the next 50, 60, 70 years. For God's sake, enjoy life, live life, do other activities. Do those things which you may not be able to do later on in life. Try and do them later. But please, please keep this perspective that the law is jealous. It's going to overtake you. You don't want to burn out. You want to continue to love your profession, whether you've been in it for 10 years, 20, 30, 40. So have a perspective and enjoy yourself. What else have I told her? With regard to the profession, she knows by example that it's a lot of hard work. I don't need to tell her that. And I don't know whether she was laughing. She said, I don't know whether I've really listened to you if you say you should work hard, but I'm sure she does, and she's doing well. What scares me for all youngsters today is this fact that we have to remember that we have to live by our values and by our conscience. And we should, as far as possible, remember that we, at least as lawyers, are governed by the rule of law and by due process. So this whole aspect of sometimes lawyers being trolled by social media is something which a person in today's day has to become very careful of. And which doesn't mean that you should lose perspective. If you are a litigator, you will do cases which will be controversial. And this is not my advice to her, this is just a generic advice. But the fact is, one should just be doing one's duty and not getting swayed away one way or the other. And remember that the mantra for a lawyer is due process. That's what I think.
Thank you. Moving on to Manjari, and in a career spanning over 2 decades, you've played different roles. So you have transitioned from litigation, to corporate law in a law firm, and then you moved to in-house counsel roles in GE for so many years and now in Maruti. What are some of the key challenges that you have faced, in each of these roles? And if you could share with us how you've navigated them.
Lavanya, yeah, this is it's a big question. First, let me tell you that there are some common challenges across the board. With GE, when I started off in a law firm, I don't think I faced any gender bias so much. I mean, it was the fact was that I was much younger in the profession than others. So it was all about, having to do the legwork and do the heavy lifting all the time, and others tend to have the better deals or transactions. And that was a matter of time. We all had to go through our paces from that perspective. In GE, when I joined GE, I think gender inequality, at least at the point that I joined at a mid level, then I grew up into a senior level, was never the case. I mean, if there's one company I really thoroughly enjoyed working in, there was absolutely no issue of gender inequality. I mean, it was because it was not that the people there, they belonged to the same society and they came to work in that company, but consciously the company had created a culture which did away with such biases, and they were done with a lot of force, in the sense there was a lot of drive right from the chairman down towards everyone, that no one ever sort of decided to act or show or display behavior that subjected you to any form of gender bias. The HR would come down extremely strongly on such people. And it was really depicted more by the leadership, because when I grew to the leadership level, I realized that as leaders, you were taught, you were given these trainings that, you were the last person to be seen propagating or demonstrating any of this kind of behavior. However, that was a unique company. Regrettably, it's dwindled off. But some learnings from there will always be. I'll cherish them immensely. It's turned me into a professional that I am today. But now coming more to when I joined Maruti, the very fact that there are differences in the sense that it was an Indian company and then now it is a Japanese company. There are cultural differences. The Western world looks at things a little differently. Here it is different. But I think you would find a little more, and especially also industries. Now, if you went into a service industry or a tech industry, you'll find perhaps more women into it. The more the number, the more the cultural change happens. When it is in the company that I'm currently working in, they've taken a hugely progressive step by getting the first ever woman in their senior management. They've never done it ever since inception. So just the thought of me coming and I have a very interesting thing that me sitting in the business review meeting of the senior management, which is done with the MD and the chairman, the very fact that there were 50 people and I was the lone woman in that room by itself was a task which daunts you. So that is the kind of the first time I ever felt challenged by my environment, by the fact that I happen to be a woman in a highly male-dominated industry or a company where they were very entitled. So Maruti is like the government. It was the government-run company earlier. So everybody's homespun. So they joined as graduate trainees and they found their way up. So there is a great sense of pride, as well as along with that a sense of entitlement. Here I was a lateral hire, and you got to start from scratch all over again to build your identity. And they say, "Arey, aap to kali aayi hain." So they forget the fact that I have a whole body of experience behind me, which you can't sort of ignore. But the fact is that you have to build gradually. So of course, yes, that I did face challenges on that front. That one woman there, second, one who has an opinion. That's even sort of takes the next sort of step towards that. But I think in all of this, what I felt is that these are social biases that find themselves into companies. Why it was not there in GE or some companies like GE is because of a concerted policy of the organization to make sure that these biases absolutely don't exist. And after a while, they change the behavior of the people who are working in the organization. Otherwise, it's very much what you see in the world outside, and you carry it to your workplace, and it's very much there. I think there are strides being made where people at, with the POSH Act and workplace, kind of harassment or equality is there. There are policies around it. Oftentimes, these are good things to have, but how much do they really get used? If there is a dismal diversity ratio, the women anyways are outnumbered. When you want to go and make a complaint or anything from that perspective, it takes a lot of you have to gather a lot of courage to go and do that, because there will be 10 people who will be ready to say this never happened. So the way I have tried to go about doing it is that behave like a professional, be a thorough professional. It is a tightrope to walk, but one that I would never advise giving up, because I think that really stands you in good stead. And after a while, the people around you settle into taking you seriously and settle into the fact that yes, you really do mean business. And while you can have a laugh or a fun and whatever on the side, but you from a professional standpoint, you do well. And another reason, way to outdo this is professionalism, yes, but be good at what you do. You really got to be 2 steps ahead, because when there are people who could use an occasion to get you down, it is very important to be better. It is important to keep ahead of the curve. It takes a lot of effort, but I think it pays off. And with a certain sense of humbleness and and professionalism, if you do it, I think it generally does pay off. And also hold your own. Like Geeta was mentioning that you begin to, after, and it happens with time and age and experience, that you laugh at that odd bad joke, back-colored joke, or some sense of ridicule. You just smile it off, and you learn to pick the battles that you're going to fight, and that's very important. You can't probably fight all of them, but you must fight the ones that are meaningful, and oftentimes others which you can let go and allow your work, your professionalism, and your determination to stand up and be good about what you're doing and passionate. I think it pays off. It takes a bit of time. There will always be that one-off dig at you or whatever. People talk behind your back. As long as they don't say anything on your face, it's fine. It's okay. But while you have detractors, there will also be many people who would be silently admiring you for what you do and for holding your own. So I think that's what I would leave you with.
Thank you so much. I think that's also, that's why a lot of times my grandmom tells me, not so much in English, but basically what she needs to say is that, choose your battles. So because I'm considered to be at home like somebody very aggressive and always like, protesting at everything. So yeah,
that's
like
a very
you said,
whole fun wisdom. Believe me, your grandmother is right.
Thank you. Namrata, I'm going to come to you. I know we've touched upon this a bit when Manjari spoke about the fact that, during COVID, how she used to have her team meetings and how women obviously were working at home and playing multiple roles. You're expected to perform as well or better at work, also keep your team together. And then obviously you're playing certain roles at home, and it's great if you have a supportive work environment, home environment. But somewhere down the line, you're expected to take up certain types of responsibilities as well. So I just want to understand from you that from that perspective, as a working woman herself, as a law firm partner, and I'm sure you're leading a team. You said something very beautiful earlier about how you're as good as the team you build at the end of the day. So how is that this past year and a half been for you? How have you dealt with it personally, the impact of the pandemic, and how have you kept your team together? And if you could share with us that what do you feel, how have you supported the workforce, and what are the measures that have been taken or can be taken?
Thanks, Lavanya. I think one of the concerns that the pandemic could have positively raised for most women is this with work from home comes the added pressure of managing things at home, that means like homeschooling, childcare, if you have elders at home, elderly care, and in most Indian homes, either it's consciously or unknowingly, women take on a lot of these roles when it comes to taking care of their family, managing things at home. I think globally that's the case. I don't think it's, there is an equal, sharing of responsibilities at home in any part of the world. But I think in India, you see this pattern more so. So I think the pressure is, and the added pressure was probably a lot for quite a few women who, had to balance those responsibilities along with the expectations that on the work side, everything has to go on seamlessly. I think that is where, I think it would be a combination of two factors to try and make things more comfortable for women. I think one would be a change in the social cultural mindset. The expectation cannot be that, while you're doing your work, you also have to single-handedly manage things at home. So I think there is a need for Indian families, as to understand that a working woman possibly cannot single-handedly do everything by herself, and it's okay to lean in on a support system, because the idea is to ensure longevity of your career, at the same time maintain your health, because only if you are healthy can you give your best to your family as well. So I think that is very important. I think on the same on the other side, also the support that you can offer as an employer to women at work is also very critical. I think it starts with empathy and trust, where the idea is to understand and recognize the challenges that a working woman or a working mother faces. At the same time, trust that, while it's okay to give her that flexibility, trust that the work will get done, and any working professional knows their responsibilities and will take care of those. I think it also helps to have a good network or mentorship within the organization, where you're able to reach out to possibly role models, mentors, people whom you can discuss your situation with, possibly other women who are also facing similar challenges. Because once you see, I think somebody during the panel discussion made this very relevant point, that when you see others coping, unknowingly you just develop that inner strength and resilience, and you somehow are inspired, and all this happens so subconsciously, it's you probably are not even aware of it. But I think when you see others coping with it and you see others dealing with a similar situation, you have the strength to get through the situation. Then again, I know a lot has been said about diversity and inclusion in the workspace, but I think these are two very different concepts. So I think diversity is more a statistic. It's more from an optics perspective. I think more critical is inclusion. It's important to be inclusive in your policies and decision making, because that is basically going that extra mile to give comfort and give assurance to women that while there may be a flexible work culture, the idea is not to leave women out or leave them behind when it comes to rewards, succession or promotions for that matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In connection with that, I want to actually, while we're on this subject, I know Manjari, you have touched a bit upon just the kind of culture that GE has, and how it was very supportive of your women colleagues, and how HR was very strict about it, and that's how the conditioning was. I want to ask you, and then Padmaja also, this question: any specific gender inclusivity, like Namita was saying that diversity is one thing to show for, but then actually inclusive measures like certain actions or policies or whatever it may be, where you can actually really work towards inclusivity in terms of gender. Is there anything in mind that you would want to share, either from GE or from Maruti? And then I would also pose the same question to Padmaja after that.
Yes, and I agree with Namita when she says that there is a difference between inclusiveness and diversity. Diversity is more sort of trying to get the numbers right of the ratio, and diversity in India is we talk of more gender diversity, but I think we're really waking up to that diversity could be at various different levels. But inclusiveness, I think, is extremely important, and that happens at various different types of things. So. Always making sure that there is a, even at the basic hiring process, how do you, whether you hire a woman or not, that's second, but to make sure that every time you're hiring, your slate always has women on it, so they are given an equal playing field. Everything being equal, she has an equal chance of getting selected as much as a man. But if you don't get her to that slate itself, then she doesn't stand a chance at all. You're not giving. So that was one measure we used to do that a lot. I think we're trying to encourage that even now in Maruti, because I think we are beginning to wake up to the fact. Like recently, there was a whole article on MG, the Hector that they have come out with. There are more than 33% women who contributed to getting that vehicle up and about. So they're trying to raise it to 50%. So I think even hardcore manufacturing, companies are also now beginning to look at this whole process, and so is my company looking at it. I think inclusiveness is also making sure that the women find a very, somebody mentioned it, that a conducive atmosphere to survive and to grow and to be understood. So to be empathetic to their needs. I have over 35% diversity in my team, and they're young people, so I'm very prepared, and I'm going through the fact that they're all at childbearing ages. So they have a family where bringing up children or delivering babies is going to be a very natural process of life. So giving them that space, making sure that it is not considered like, oh, she's now gone on maternity, what the hell am I going to do? It is that you understand that this is a great thing. You are also bringing a life into the world, but just as a man would probably be given some leave, and nobody bothers and conveniently takes and does his work. The similar way, I think, the work would be just sort of channeled into with the rest of the team, and then a person comes back and is equally inclusive about that. You're not reducing the performance ratings of women when they proceed on maternity. See, that's very important. So we have in Maruti also, we've got this now, that there is going to be a certain minimum level of rating that would be provided to them, so that at least the platform to begin back is not come down. It gives you a platform from there to take off. Obviously, yes, we do have our priorities, and we also have to be pragmatic and realistic that yes, if you've been away for some time, there will be some catching up to do, which is fine. Those are trade-offs that you make in life. But more than that, I think the more women you will have, I think the male population also becomes gets cognizant of seeing female professional colleagues in the environment and how to deal with them. I think when you don't have women around, it gets very difficult to know what kind of behaviors would be acceptable and or not, because you've never seen them and never done them. So you need to be around them to be able to get that understanding. We are also, I think, doing a lot on, the prevention of sexual harassment is an act, all right, but I think a lot of training and sensitization. And I believe that this all, to make it very, very inclusive, must come right from the top. It should be top down. It cannot be otherwise. The chairman, the CEO, and the management, everyone needs to be talking the same language for it to go down and for it to become a credible voice. It could be something on paper, but if it doesn't translate into action, people begin to doubt its credibility. So it has to be done in that manner to be able to cement it. And I think some companies are ahead of the curve in this, and others are catching up. But I fully believe now that inclusion and diversity is a big agenda. Just like sustainability and climate change is, this is an equally big agenda, and teams and companies are becoming cognizant of it. It will take some more time than the others, but I think they're on the track.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Thanks, Manjari. Padmaja, would you, like to add to that and share a bit from Indus Law?
Yeah, in fact, as I'd already said earlier, I mean, it's very important to have a conducive environment, so that one can rise to their potential. So, I would be remiss to sort of, not compliment my organization here, because it's not about gender inclusivity here, but about the absence of exclusivity, as I would put it. So, that's what I have been privileged to experience here. Age and gender here have no part to play in decision-making, client management, strategizing. It's all about which individual can best deal with what's at hand. Indus Law actually has helped me create an image amongst my clients that my team and I are now, named as the 3 a.m. lawyers. So, if the gender, I don't feel there's a gender disparity in a place where I work. And, with the times, changing, we've sort of brought in more policies in terms of unlimited leave, which is a policy that we've introduced. We've also within the firm, we're trying to introduce a flexible work from home policy, which after the pandemic, we've realized that it is possible and, people can balance a work and home situation. It is a very pro-woman culture. And as I'd already said, we're one of the highest women to men ratio in the leadership role scenario as well. So I think the environment is very women, friendly. And I think overall, but as I would like to add, like Manjari said, it's all sort of changing and evolving. So with time, I guess we all have to change with respect to framing other policies. I would believe that now even there's a bill that's been introduced with respect to period leaves for women. So things like that are coming in, and things every day will evolve and change. So, it's always a change in, process of change, but I guess we're all reaching there.
So if I may just add there, I completely agree with Padmaja. I think, from what I hear from, my friends from other law firms, I think I'm very proud to say that, Indus Law, I think, is ahead of the curve in terms of, giving that support that working women, working mothers need. I have, been here for about 7 years, and I have seen several. I of course joined as a working mother, but I've seen several women take breaks. Could be maternity leaves, could be a sabbatical. They come back, but I consistently see them very eager to get back. They never shy away, or they're never nervous about what this entails for me as a working mother. I think a big part of that, the credit should go to right, like Manjari was saying, it comes from top down. Right from people in senior leadership, to everyone along the chain. I think they are sensitized to the fact that the atmosphere needs to be inclusive. We need to encourage and be supportive of women getting back to work. And I think the value that women bring to the table is appreciated, and there is no discrimination or favorable bias towards men that I've seen.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I think which comes to my mind is with respect to women's right and empowerment, as I've really followed the the great RBG, so it comes to my mind where she said that I ask no favor for my sex, all I ask for our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks. So I think it's very well suited in this situation. So
thank you so much. It's been an amazing discussion with all of you. Before I let you go, and hopefully enjoy whatever's left of your evening, just one quick question, because the theme for International Women's Day this time is #ChooseToChallenge. So I just want to ask that one thing from you before you leave. As is evident from the discussion we've had today, and whatever I know of all of you, that I'm sure you've already challenged innumerable things, in your career so far, and not only challenge and overcome. But if there's this, is that one thing? What is that one thing that if you had to pick, would you choose to challenge this year?
I think that, we face many challenges on a day-to-day basis, so it's just tough to pick that one, but I think after this discussion, I hadn't prepared anything for this, but I think after this discussion, what I've picked up today, I think I wish to mentor at least one woman this year and help her make headway and enable her to stand tall, follow her passion, mentor her, and walk her through all the adversities she may face, and support that at least that one woman at least, and maybe help her understand that it's only that glass ceiling and that she definitely can break it.
What do you, I don't have anything specific in mind that I would like to challenge and, go after aggressively. I think in the context of what we are talking about today and, on the Women's Day, I think I would, there was one thing that I really had to think about, I think I would try and work towards or building or trying to make sure others appreciate that points of view are very important. It is very important for everybody as professionals more so, and even in your everyday life, to one, have a point of view, to be able to state it without fear, and to also be in an environment that is accepting of points of view. And when I say accepting of points of view, I don't mean that you have to go and sort of act upon it. There can be a disagreement, but disagreement does not mean that you got to be disagreeable. So I think those would be my areas of challenge that I think I would like to work on.
What about Namita? Why don't you speak? Then I'll say something after that.
Sure. I think the one thing I would like to challenge is, I think often we see that, women themselves, set limits for themselves where they start questioning how far they would be capable of going, possibly because of, the whole societal conditioning. Could also be, there is a lot of backlash because, like we were talking, women could be perceived as aggressive or, having, for that matter, even ambition is seen as a bad word, right, when it comes to women. So I would say that, challenge your own, the walls that you have built for yourself, go beyond that, because I would think nothing is, out of reach. I don't think there is any virtue in, diminishing yourself. And I think women are often guilty of that. How many times, have we come across women when somebody is complimenting them, they're the first to, try and, I think, take away from that compliment. So I would say don't shy away from acknowledging your strengths, your achievements, because it's well deserved. I don't think it's anything to be apologetic about. And definitely bridge the confidence gap, which exists from a gender perspective, because I think once you do that, then, nothing is beyond your reach.
So I just managed to think of my answer while everyone was talking. And this year, there was that skin-to-skin touch judgment of one of the benches of the Maharashtra High Court, Mumbai High Court. And we challenged it on behalf of the National Commission for Women in the Supreme Court. And my take is slightly different. Since I've challenged it, I can't say too much, but what I do feel strongly about is that a person may be wrong. A judge may have made a wrong decision, but it is our right of appeal. But we cannot be trolling that person. We cannot be putting down someone. He's made a wrong decision. And in this particular case, actually this issue had come up before the UK court. And after a lot of deliberation, to Court of Appeal's judgment reached the conclusion that we are trying to tell the Supreme Court to reach. maybe we won't agree with the court, the High Court's view, and I don't agree, which is why we are party to the SLP. But I do think that we have a right of appeal, and that is what we should exercise rather than an outright condemnation. So that's what I would choose to challenge, that let's agree to disagree if we disagree, but let's do it in a healthy manner.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing talking to you all. Padmaja, I will see you on Friday. Geeta ma'am, I hope to join you for a drink at an event, if not a walk. And Manjari, of course, I hope to see you soon. And Namrata, I hope you're going to be in Delhi sometime soon. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.